can third parties build power in the United States? And if so, how?
Well, the whole system is set up to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? And we've seen
Yes.
time and again the way in which we don't have a true democracy in the United States. We have an oligarchic republic that is controlled by the capitalist ruling class and that tries to ensure that any party formation that would be on the side of the people is completely excluded from the possibility of power and even from public debate. Right now, of course, we'll see what happens with the most recent, I think, probably most prominent instantiation thereof, and that is Cornel West now running for the Green Party, right? Cornel West is a social democrat who is dedicated to certain progressive positions that are markedly different than anything that we see on the part of the Democrats and the Republicans. He was involved in the Sanders campaign, has his, critiques to the left of Sanders. He also is a believer and can mobilize a kind of Christian base in a very, very interesting way. The Democratic Party has already started, as we saw with Sanders' positions and whatnot, what is sure to be one of the most heinous slander campaigns against West, probably in the history of electoral politics. And so we'll see how this plays out. I assume I'm not privy to and part of these internal discussions, of course, although I did have the pleasure of interviewing Cornel West years ago. I assume that one of the main reasons that he's running is not based on the assumption that the Green Party can get on enough ballots in enough states to actually be able to vote him into office, but so that he can occupy a position that can hopefully help change part of the conversation in the United States, like the Sanders campaign, for all of its ultimate failings, did in various ways, because it made socialism into something that was no longer a bad word. And so in that regard, I think that West's contributions, we'll see how they play out, are promising for, at a minimum, changing the nature of the conversation. And we'll see perhaps more than that. But I think we have to remain, cautiously, optimistic in the sense of the objective optimism that I was talking about. We have to look at the actual extant play of forces. And it would be quite surprising if West was able to be voted into office.
Do you think the left as a whole is in a better place than it was prior to 2016, or in a worse one?
The left in electoral politics?
Just big
in
picture.
general?
Yeah, activism, electorally, just domestically, but, kind
Yeah.
of big picture domestically.
It's a good question. I mean, I think we're going through a serious moment of transition in which the two Sanders campaigns, I think, have demonstrated to a lot of people that electoral change is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, within the US context, because then also you have the consequences of, Trump's presidency and now Biden's presidency, both of which I find catastrophic for working people. And so I think that there is an increasing both interest in leftism and political mobilization around leftist causes. At the same time, there is a lack of viable infrastructure in the sense of developed parties, unions, a kind of culture of the left, which you do have. I spent a lot of time in France, and you have that in a country like France, where you have, even on TV shows, you have people debating politics, and there are Marxists who are on TV. Of course, you'd never have that on CNN or anything like that. And so one of the most important struggles is to build up that infrastructure so that we have much more cultural, political, labor-based infrastructure for a kind of culture of the left. And I do think that we're headed in that direction. I think there are some very positive signs on that front. I also think that reality is on our side. One of the great quotes from Michael Parenti that I often reference is, he said, the problem with the ruling class that they've always had is that reality is radical, because reality makes people radical. Reality is homelessness and downward mobility and stagnant wages and all the shit that working class people have to deal with. And given that reality is radical, people are increasingly looking for and getting involved in alternative modes of organizing, and that's extremely promising. And that's one of the reasons that there's so much propaganda being pumped out, both in order to try to funnel people into the Democratic Party and its machine, or further to the right, simply to funnel people into fascist modes of organizing through all the anti-China propaganda, all the anti-Russia propaganda, and things like this. And it's another reason that we need a real kind of cultural power in order to direct people in a different direction, to identify who their real enemies are. The real enemies aren't Russians or Chinese people. The real enemies are the capitalist ruling class, who are producing propaganda that are telling them that the Russians and the Chinese are the real enemies, or the Mexican immigrants, or, there's lots of other potential enemies, the black people, et cetera, et cetera.
So, do you think we'll see an end to the American empire in our lifetimes?
I think it's very possible. Depends on how long we live, and depends on how good we are at organizing.
Okay.
But I think that one of the single most important things for people to understand, and it took me a long time to understand this, is that an enormous part of the capitalist cultural apparatus, right, the system of culture in the United States that beams out and dominates the airwaves so much that 90% of what all US Americans see and hear is produced by 5 mega corporations, right, that produce the news and also produce all of the entertainment. That one of the principal things that they do is project US power and US exceptionalism, telling us that the US is the greatest country on earth, the most powerful military, the most developed economy, on and on and on. So much so that people can't even see very basic things. Like the US has lost an innumerable number of its military interventions. It's backing the Ukraine, and it cannot win that war. It has not, as of yet, been able to win that war in the way that the US administration wanted to win that war. The Afghanistan was a debacle. Iraq was it's quote unquote successfully, toppled the Saddam Hussein, but has, turned the country has caused enormous problems within the country. The US empire has not been able to overthrow Cuba. They've not been able to overthrow China. They have been able to overthrow a country like Grenada, a very small socialist country. In that regard, people have to recognize that even at the military level, the US empire, since Vietnam for that matter, a moment in time at which barefoot peasants handed a resounding defeat to the US empire, right? We have to be able to see through the power projection of the US empire and recognize not only that it's fragile, but that its history has been marked by a whole series of losses, and those losses have been victories for working people around the world. And so the world is changing very, very quickly. The COVID crisis was a good example of it, with more than 1 million deaths in the United States and all of the economic consequences from that. And Lenin famously said that there are, I'm paraphrasing here, decades where almost nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. Our moment in time resembles.
Wait, when did John say that?
Lenin.
I was trying to make a joke. Sorry.
Oh, John? Who's John?
No, you said Lenin said that, and I was like, oh wait, when did John say that?
Oh, got
I
it.
do. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, sorry. I'm slow on the uptake there. And I think that our moment, at least as of late, has been a moment in which things are changing very rapidly in the world. And so it gives it's a promising moment for continuing to build power in the direction of dismantling the US empire.
I hope you are right. I hope you are right. So in closing here, where can people go to learn more about you and your work and the workshops and everything that you have going on?
Well, I try to keep my work up to date on my website, gabrielrockhill.com. The critical theory workshop information is on my website, or people can search it in the search engine. I'm on Twitter. I'm not as active as some, but I am there. Those are probably some of the main go-to spots, I guess.
Right on. Dr. Rockhill, thank you so much for doing this. I always love your input and could talk to you all day, and I really appreciate you doing the show.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the great work that you're doing, and keep it up. Appreciate it.